Now let's switch gears to a scenario where we do need to use that service principal. And here, if we just take a look at this part and focus over here, we see that we still have Power Automate, still have Teams. And what we need to do instead of posting a Teams message is adding the user to a team. And to do that, in this scenario, we need Microsoft Graph API. So instead of using the connector, we use the Graph API to perform this action. Why? Because in this case, this is for a real business scenario, the service account may not have access to the target team. So I'm going to use Flow to add this user into that teams, but the service account executing the flow won't have access to the teams. And if you pay attention, it makes sense because then in this context, the service account should have access to all teams in the whole organization. If you haven't used the Graph API before, let's jump to it in a moment. If you search for the overview of the Graph API, the Graph API is basically a service that Microsoft has to integrate all its ecosystem, meaning that identities, devices, Word, SharePoint, Teams, all the digital workplace apps, the platform itself, everything is accessible via the Graph API or in the way to doing so. Still, we have some legacy APIs around because we're moving towards that since quite a few years. And if you navigate to the particular endpoint documentation, you go to the Microsoft Graph REST API documentation and search for add member. You would see this page where it's explained how to use this endpoint to add a user into a team using directly the Graph API, not the Power Automate connector. And here's where we need to pay attention to permissions types, because what we were doing with the Power Automate flow is delegated permission type. So it's on behalf of the user executing the flow, meaning that I can only add users to a team I am a member of as a user, as a service account, or an individual user. Instead, what we want to do is service-to-service authentication using an application grant type. So back to the diagram, that means that we need to set up an app registration in Azure Active Directory in Enter ID and give this app registration permissions to do this permission on the Graph API. Now, we won't consume directly from the Power Automate the secret from here, because otherwise we would be hard coding, putting in plain text a secret value, a password, directly in the Power Automate flow, which can be potentially accessible by a lot of people. Instead, what we want to do is put Azure Key Vault in the middle, which you probably already know, to store that secret, and then Power Automate uses the connector to access the Key Vault, so that the account accessing the Key Vault needs to have permissions over the Key Vault. Then we control who can access which account, and then basically I get the secret in Power Automate at runtime. So if it changes, I will get the latest version and execute the Graph API without any problems. Now, what's the complexity that this scenario has is that if we want to be able to renew or rotate the secret value, we would need to automate somehow both the renewal of the app registration and the updating of the new secret into Azure Key Vault. Now let's review what we